The autumn rain fell like tears across the cracked asphalt of Murphy's gas station, somewhere between nowhere and forgotten on Route 47. The neon sign flickered, casting red shadows that danced across the empty parking lot. It was the kind of place where people stopped only when they had to for gas, for coffee that tasted like regret, or sometimes when they were running from something they couldn't escape. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. But that night, something different happened. Something that would turn 8 hardened men into protectors, and one terrified girl into the reason an entire brotherhood would redefine what family means. If you believe in second chances, in the power of standing up for those who can't stand up for themselves, then take a moment right now to like, comment, share, and subscribe to this channel. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Because this story, this moment of courage in the face of darkness deserves to be heard everywhere. Marcus Steele. Donovan had been riding for 23 years. His Harley-Davidson Fat Boy was more than a machine. It was freedom, rebellion, and the only thing in his life that had never let him down. The president of the Devil's Backbone chapter of the Hells Angels. Steele was a man carved from granite and leather, with scars that told stories he'd never speak aloud. His crew had stopped at Murphy's for what should have been a routine fuel break. 8 bikes, 8 brothers, heading home from a charity ride in Denver. The irony wasn't lost on him, men who society feared had just spent the weekend delivering Christmas presents to children's hospitals. But that's who they really were beneath the intimidating exterior. Protectors, not predators. The gas station's fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows across Steele's weathered face as he filled his tank. At 45, he'd seen enough of the world's cruelty to know that evil often wore a friendly face, while good sometimes came wrapped in leather and attitude. That's when he heard it, a sound so soft, so broken, that it almost disappeared beneath the hum of the overhead lights and the distant rumble of highway traffic. A whimper. No, not quite a whimper. A suppressed sob. The kind that came from someone who'd learned that crying too loudly brought more pain. Steele's head turned toward the sound, his instincts honed by years of military service and street wisdom. There, partially hidden behind a rusted dumpster near the station sidewall, sat a girl who couldn't have been more than 14. But what stopped Steele's heart wasn't her age, it was the wheelchair. She was small for her age, with dark hair that hung in wet strands around her face. Her clothes were soaked through from the rain, and she was shivering violently. But it was her eyes that hit Steele like a physical blow, wide, terrified, and holding the kind of fear that spoke of things no child should ever experience. The wheelchair was old, probably a hand-me-down from some medical supply donation. One wheel was slightly bent, and the padding on the armrest was worn thin. She clutched the wheels with white knuckles, as if the chair was the only solid thing in a world that had gone completely wrong. Steele approached slowly, the way he'd learned to approach wounded animals during his childhood on his grandfather's farm. He removed his helmet, his steel-gray hair catching the neon light, and crouched down so he wouldn't tower over her. "Hey there," he said, his voice gentler than most people had ever heard it. "You okay, sweetheart?" The girl's head snapped up, and for a moment, pure terror flashed across her face. She tried to wheel backward, but the dumpster blocked her escape. Her breath came in quick, shallow gasps, the beginning of a panic attack. "Easy, easy," Steele murmured, staying perfectly still. "I'm not going to hurt you. I promise you that." The other Hells Angels had noticed Steele's absence from their group. One by one, they drifted over, forming a loose semicircle but keeping their distance. Razor, Tank, Phoenix, Diesel, Crow, Wrench, and Mad Dog, names that sounded like threats but belonged to men who would die before hurting an innocent. "What's your name?" Steele asked softly. The girl's voice was barely a whisper, so quiet that Steele had to lean forward to hear her. "Sophie. Sophie Martinez." "Sophie. That's a beautiful name." Steele's smile was genuine, warming his usually hard features. "I'm Marcus, but everyone calls me Steele. These are my friends. We're not going to hurt you, Sophie, but you're soaking wet and shivering. How long have you been out here? Sophie's eyes darted between the bikers, and Steele could see her trying to decide whether to trust them or fear them. The decision seemed to exhaust her. Since yesterday, she whispered. I think it's hard to tell. Yesterday, Steele felt anger begin to build in his chest, cold and controlled. A disabled 14-year-old girl had been alone in the rain for over 24 hours. Where are your parents, Sophie? And that's when she said the words that would haunt Steele's dreams and fuel his determination for months to come. She leaned forward in her wheelchair, her voice breaking with fear and desperation, and whispered, I can't run from him. He knows I can't run. The words hung in the air like a curse. Steele felt every muscle in his body tense, while behind him, he heard the sharp intake of breath from his brothers. They'd all served in the military. They'd all seen combat. But there was something about the helpless terror in those 7 words that cut deeper than any battlefield wound. Who's Sophie? Steele's voice remained calm, but his eyes had gone cold as winter steel. Who knows you can't run? Sophie's hands trembled as she wiped rain and tears from her face. My stepfather, Rick Callahan. She couldn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. The bruises on her arms, partially hidden by her soaked sleeves, told the story. Tank stepped forward, his massive frame blocking the wind. At 6'6" and 300 pounds of solid muscle, Tank could intimidate a grizzly bear, but his voice was gentle as a prayer. How long has this been going on, little sister? Since my mom married him 2 years ago. But it got worse after the accident. Sophie touched her legs, which lay motionless beneath a thin blanket. Car crash 6 months ago. Mom was driving. She didn't make it. Now it's just me and Rick, and he says I'm a burden. He says no one would believe a crippled kid over an upstanding member of the community. Diesel, who rarely spoke unless it was absolutely necessary, stepped into the light. His face was a mask of controlled fury. What does he do? To you, Sophie? Sophie's voice became even smaller. He gets angry when I can't do things fast enough. When I drop something or can't reach the dishes or need help with basic things. He says I'm worthless. Yesterday he hit me with his belt because I couldn't make dinner the way he wanted. Then he said he was tired of looking at me and told me to get out. He thought it was funny because her voice cracked. Because he knew I couldn't run away like other kids. The silence that followed was deafening. 8 of the most dangerous men in 3 counties stood around a terrified disabled girl, and every one of them was thinking the same thing. Rick Callahan was about to discover what real fear felt like. Steele pulled out his phone. Sophie, I'm going to call someone who can help. But first, you need to know something. He looked directly into her eyes. You're safe now. No one, and I mean no one, is going to hurt you again. Do you understand me? Sophie stared at him for a long moment, searching his face for any sign of deception. Whatever she saw there must have convinced her, because for the first time since they'd found her, her shoulders relaxed just a fraction. You promise? She whispered. I promise, Steele said, and every man behind him nodded in agreement. On my word as a Hell's Angel. And on the memory of my own daughter, I promise. Steele's call went to Detective Sarah Chen, a woman he'd worked with before on cases involving missing children. The Hells Angels had an unofficial relationship with certain members of law enforcement cops who understood that sometimes justice needed a push in the right direction. Sarah, it's Steele. I need you at Murphy's gas station on Route 47. We've got a situation. While they waited for Detective Chen, the brothers formed a protective circle around Sophie. Phoenix, who had daughters of his own, went into the gas station and bought dry clothes, hot chocolate, and every candy bar on the dotty shelf. Wrench pulled a first aid kit from his bike and began treating the cuts and bruises he could see, his hands impossibly gentle for someone who looked like he could bench press a motorcycle. Sophie, Steele said as they waited, tell me about your stepfather. What does he do for work? He's a city councilman, Sophie said, accepting the hot chocolate with shaking hands. Everyone thinks he's this great guy. He coaches Little League, volunteers at the food bank, goes to church every Sunday. People love him. Of course he did, Steele had seen this pattern before: predators who built public personas as pillars of the community, making their victims seem less credible by comparison. It was a sick but effective strategy. Does he know where you are now? Sophie shook her head. I don't think so. After he told me to leave, I waited until he was asleep. Then I took what money I could find and called a taxi. I told the driver to bring me to the farthest place $20 would take me. That was here. Smart kid. Scared, traumatized, but smart. Detective Chen arrived 15 minutes later, followed by an ambulance and a social worker named Mrs. Rodriguez. As Sophie was checked over by the paramedics, Steele pulled Detective Chen aside. Sarah, this isn't just abuse. This is a disabled kid being tortured by a psychopath who's counting on the fact that no one will believe her over a city councilman. I believe you, Detective Chen said, watching Sophie interact tentatively with Mrs. Rodriguez. But Steele, you know how this works. We need evidence. We need testimony. We need him to confess, Steele interrupted. And I think I know how to make that happen. Detective Chen gave him a sharp look. Steele, whatever you're thinking, nothing illegal, Steele assured her, though his smile was predatory. Just a little psychological pressure. Sometimes bad men need to understand that their actions have consequences. An hour later, Sophie was on her way to the hospital for a full medical evaluation, with Mrs. Rodriguez promising to find her a safe foster placement immediately. As the ambulance pulled away, Sophie pressed her face to the window and waved at the 8 bikers who had become her protectors. Steele waved back, then turned to his brothers. Gentlemen, we need to pay a visit to Councilman Rick Callahan. What happened next became legend in biker circles across 3 states. Steele didn't just call his own chapter. He called every Hells Angels chapter within a 500-mile radius. He called the Mongols, the Outlaws, the Bandidos clubs that normally viewed each other with suspicion or outright hostility. But when it came to protecting children, old rivalries meant nothing. The message was simple. A disabled girl was tortured by her stepfather. He thought she couldn't run, so no one would help her. Time to show him what happens when an entire brotherhood decides to make a statement. By dawn, motorcycles were converging on the small town of Cedar Falls from every direction. They came from Colorado, Kansas, Nebraska, and Wyoming. They rode through the night, engines roaring like thunder, carrying men who had dropped everything: jobs, plans, family obligations, because a girl in a wheelchair had whispered, "I can't run from him." Razor, who served as the chapter's secretary, kept count. By 8 a.m., there were 47 motorcycles parked outside the local diner. By 10 a.m., there were 83. By noon, the number had reached 120. The town of Cedar Falls had never seen anything like it. Main Street looked like the staging area for the world's most intimidating parade. Leather-clad men filled the sidewalks, but they weren't causing trouble. They were drinking coffee, buying meals, and being surprisingly polite to the nervous shop owners. The message, however, was unmistakable. Rick Callahan's house sat on Elm Street, a neat 2-story colonial with a manicured lawn and a blessed family sign in the front yard. It was the kind of house that screamed respectability and American dreams. The kind of house where nightmares were supposed to stay locked in the basement. At 2 p.m., exactly 24 hours after Sophie had whispered her confession in the rain, Rick Callahan opened his front door to find Steele standing on his porch. Behind Steele, stretching down the entire block and around the corner, were 119 other motorcycles. Callahan was a man in his late 40s, soft around the middle, with thinning brown hair and the kind of smile that belonged on campaign posters. He was handsome in a generic, trustworthy way, the kind of man people automatically liked and believed. That smile faltered when he saw the army of bikers occupying his neighborhood. Can I help you?" Callahan stammered, his politician's composure cracking. Steele removed his helmet and tucked it under his arm. "Mr. Callahan, my name is Marcus. Donovan. I believe you know why I'm here." Callahan's face went through several expressions: confusion, fear, calculation, then back to his practiced political mask. "I'm sorry, but I don't know what you're talking about." If this is some kind of intimidation tactic, Sophie Martinez, Steele said quietly. All the color drained from Callahan's face. I don't know anyone by that name, Callahan said, but his voice had lost its confidence. Steele smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Funny thing about lies, Mr. Callahan. They're a lot like bullies, they only work when the other person is afraid or alone. Sophie isn't alone anymore. From his jacket pocket, Steele pulled out a digital recorder. You see, Sophie spent 2 hours yesterday talking to Detective Chen. She told her everything. About the beatings, about the belt, about how you told her no one would believe a crippled kid over a respected councilman. Callahan's breathing became shallow. You can't prove anything. It's her word against mine. You're right, Steele agreed. It is. But here's the thing. He gestured to the motorcycles behind him. We don't need proof to express our disappointment in your behavior. We don't need a court order to visit your neighborhood. We don't need permission to make sure everyone in this town knows exactly what kind of man you really are. Tank appeared beside Steele, his massive frame casting a shadow across the entire porch. See, Councilman, we've got time. Lots of time. And we've got friends. Lots of friends. More bikers began walking up the street, their boots echoing on the pavement like a slow drumbeat. They didn't threaten. They didn't shout. They just stood there, silent and immovable, like leather-clad mountains. What do you want? Callahan whispered. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Justice, Steele said simply. You see, Mr. Callahan, Sophie told us something interesting. She said you like to hurt her because you know she can't run away. You found that funny. Steele leaned closer, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. But here's what you didn't count on. You can run, Mr. Callahan. You've got 2 good legs. But no matter how fast you run, no matter how far you go, we'll be there. Because unlike Sophie, we can follow you anywhere. Callahan's political mask finally shattered completely. You're threatening me. No, Steele said calmly. I'm making you a promise. Every day that Sophie spends in foster care because of what you did to her, we'll be reminding this town what kind of man they elected. Every time you show your face in public, we'll be there. Not breaking any laws, not causing any trouble, just present. Phoenix stepped forward, holding up his phone. Already posted your picture and address on every biker forum from here to California. Funny thing about the internet, information travels fast. Callahan looked around desperately, as if seeking escape, but motorcycles and their riders surrounded his house as far as he could see. Neighbors were coming out of their houses, staring in amazement at the sight. You want this to end? Steele asked. Then you call Detective Chen right now and confess. All of it. Every bruise, every cruel word. Every time you made that girl feel worthless because she couldn't fight back. And if I don't? Steele's smile was cold as winter wind. Then we wait. Right here. Right now. We've got nowhere else to be. As if to emphasize the point, several bikers began unpacking camping chairs from their bikes. Others pulled out coolers and began setting up what looked like a very long-term presence. Mrs. Henderson from next door approached tentatively. Excuse me, are you gentlemen going to be here long? Tank tipped his cap politely. Yes, ma'am. We're here to make sure justice is served for a little girl who was hurt by this man. We'll be respectful of the neighborhood, but we're not leaving until he does the right thing. Mrs. Henderson looked at Callahan with new eyes. What little girl? What followed was the most thorough character assassination in Cedar Falls history, conducted entirely through legal and peaceful means. Word spread through the town like wildfire. Within hours, everyone knew about Sophie, about the abuse, about the man they'd trusted with their votes and their children's safety. The story was already being picked up by regional news stations, thanks to Phoenix's social media expertise. Local reporter Jennifer Walsh arrived with a camera crew. Mr. Callahan, can you comment on allegations that you physically abused your disabled stepdaughter? Callahan tried to retreat into his house, but the questions followed him. Mr. Callahan, Is it true you told Sophie Martinez that no one would believe her because of her disability? The Hells Angels maintained their vigil, taking shifts so that there were always at least 20 motorcycles visible from Callahan's windows. They were unfailingly polite to neighbors and reporters, explaining their presence calmly and factually. We're here because a 14-year-old girl in a wheelchair was beaten and abandoned by her stepfather, Steele told the cameras. She's in foster care now, safe, but she'll carry those scars forever. We want to make sure the man responsible understands that actions have consequences. By evening, the story had gone viral. Number Justice for Sophie was trending on social media. Videos of 120 motorcycles lined up in front of a city councilman's house were being shared across the country. The pressure became unbearable. At 9:47 p.m., Rick Callahan walked out of his house with his hands shaking and his face pale as paper. He approached Steele, who was sitting on his bike reading a book about motorcycle maintenance. "I want to make a deal," Callahan said quietly. Steele didn't look up from his book. "We don't make deals with child abusers. I'll confess. I'll admit to everything. But you have to call them off." Callahan gestured desperately at the motorcycles. Now Steele looked up. "You'll confess to Detective Chen? On the record? Full confession?" "Yes." "And you'll plead guilty to whatever charges they file?" "Yes." Steele closed his book and studied Callahan's face for a long moment. "And you'll set up a fund for Sophie's medical expenses and future education?" Callahan hesitated. "How much?" "Everything you have. House, savings, pension. All of it goes to Sophie and other disabled children who need advocates." That's my entire life." Steele's expression didn't change. "Sophie's entire life was destroyed by you. Seems fair." Callahan stood there for several minutes, weighing his options while 120 bikers waited patiently. Finally, his shoulders slumped in defeat. "Okay, I'll do it." Steele pulled out his phone and called Detective Chen. "Sarah, Mr. Callahan would like to confess to aggravated child abuse. Can you meet us at the station?" The Cedar Falls police station had never been so crowded. 120 motorcycles filled the parking lot and spilled onto the street. The bikers formed two lines leading from the parking lot to the front door, an honor guard of sorts, ensuring that Rick Callahan completed his walk of shame. Inside, Detective Chen had set up a video camera and brought in the district attorney. What followed was 3 hours of detailed confession that would become a textbook example of how not to handle child abuse cases. Callahan admitted to everything: the physical abuse, the emotional torture, the systematic degradation of a disabled child who couldn't defend herself. He described, in horrific detail, how he had specifically targeted Sophie's vulnerabilities, using her disability as a weapon against her. "I told her that no one would believe her because she was in a wheelchair," Callahan said, his voice flat and emotionless. "I said people would think she was making things up for attention. I made her feel like she was worthless, like she was a burden everyone wanted to get rid of." Detective Chen had to take several breaks during the confession. Even she, a 20-year veteran who had seen every form of human cruelty, found Callahan's casual description of torturing a disabled child difficult to stomach. Outside, the bikers waited in complete silence. They'd removed their helmets and stood with their heads bowed, as if attending a funeral. In a way, they were witnessing the death of a little girl's innocence and the burial of her trust in the world. When it was over, Callahan was formally charged with aggravated child abuse, endangerment, and criminal neglect. The district attorney indicated that given the severity of the crimes and the defendant's confession, they would be seeking the maximum sentence. As Callahan was led away in handcuffs, Steele felt a hand on his shoulder. He turned to find Detective Chen, tears in her eyes. "Thank you," she said simply. "Without you, he would have gotten away with it. Sophie would have disappeared into the foster system, and he would have found another victim." Steele shook his head. "We didn't do anything special. We just refused to let an innocent kid suffer alone." "That," Detective Chen said, "is exactly what made it special." 3 weeks later, Steele received a call from Mrs. Rodriguez, the social worker. Sophie was staying with the Thompson family, a couple who specialized in caring for children with disabilities. She was adjusting well, attending a new school, and most importantly, she was safe. "She's been asking about you," Mrs. Rodriguez said. "About all of you. She wants to know if she can see the angels on motorcycles again." Steele smiled at the description. "We'd like that too." The reunion took place at Cedar Falls Community Center, which had donated their largest room for the occasion. Sophie was waiting when the bikers arrived, dressed in a bright yellow dress with her hair tied back in a neat ponytail. She looked like a completely different child, still fragile, still healing, but no longer broken. "Mr. Steele," she called out, her face lighting up with the first genuine smile anyone had seen from her. Steele knelt beside her wheelchair, and Sophie threw her arms around his neck. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for keeping your promise. Always, kiddo. How are you doing?" "Better. The Thompsons are really nice. Mrs. Thompson used to be a physical therapist, and she's helping me get stronger." And look, Sophie demonstrated how she could now transfer from her wheelchair to a regular chair with minimal assistance. "I'm getting more independent." Tank wiped his eyes with his sleeve. "That's amazing, little sister." Sophie had something for each of them, thank you cards she'd made by hand, decorated with pictures of they, motorcycles and angels. Inside each card, she'd written a personal message. To Steele, "Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible." To Tank, "Thank you for making me feel safe." To Phoenix, "Thank you for making sure everyone knew my story." As the afternoon wore on, Sophie shared her plans for the future. She wanted to study law, to become an advocate for disabled children. She wanted to make sure no other kid ever had to whisper, "I can't run from him," in the rain behind a gas station. "I want to be like you," she told Steele. "I want to protect people who can't protect themselves." Steele looked at this remarkable young woman who had endured unimaginable cruelty but had emerged with her compassion intact, and he felt something he hadn't experienced in years: hope for the future. "Sophie," he said, "you're already stronger than any of us." The Sophie Martinez case became a catalyst for change that none of them had expected. The viral video of 120 motorcycles lined up to protect one disabled girl had sparked a national conversation about child abuse, disability rights, and the power of community action. The Hells Angels found themselves in the unusual position of being praised by lawmakers and social workers across the country. Congressman Patricia Williams invited Steele to testify before a House subcommittee on child welfare reform. "Mr. Donovan," she said during the hearing, "your actions on behalf of Sophie Martinez represent everything that's right about American values. You saw injustice and you acted. You protected the vulnerable and held the powerful accountable." Steele was uncomfortable with the praise. "Ma'am, we just did what anyone should do. A kid was in trouble, and we helped her." "But that's exactly the point," Congressman Williams replied. "You say anyone should do this, but the reality is that most people don't. They look the other way. They assume someone else will handle it. You and your brothers prove that ordinary citizens can make an extraordinary difference." The hearing led to increased funding for child protective services and new legislation requiring more thorough background checks for foster parents and guardians. It also established a national hotline specifically for disabled children to report abuse, something that wouldn't have existed without Sophie's courage in speaking up. But perhaps the most significant change was in the Hells Angels themselves. What had started as 8 men protecting one girl had evolved into a formal organization. The Hells Angels established the Sophie's Shield program, partnering with social services agencies to provide protection and advocacy for at-risk children, particularly those with disabilities. Chapters across the country began organizing protective rides, forming motorcycle escorts for children who had to testify against their abusers in court, ensuring they felt safe and supported during the most difficult moments of their lives. The program expanded to include emergency response teams for immediate child protection, (ENAZ), advocacy training for bikers who wanted to become court-appointed guardians, (NEAs), fundraising for adaptive equipment and therapy for disabled children, community education about recognizing and reporting child abuse. Within 2 years, Sophie Shield had helped over 500 children escape abusive situations and had raised more than $2 million for child protection programs. Rick Callahan's trial began 6 months after his confession. Despite his guilty plea, the prosecutor decided to proceed with a full trial to ensure that the complete scope of his crimes became part of the public record. Sophie, now 15 and significantly stronger both physically and emotionally, chose to testify. The courtroom was packed with supporters of the Thompson family, social workers, advocates, and in the back rows, 20 Hell's Angels who had come to ensure Sophie knew she wasn't alone. He used to tell me that my wheelchair made me worthless, Sophie testified, her voice clear and strong. He said I was a burden that nobody wanted. He would hit me with his belt and then laugh because he knew I couldn't run away like other kids. The defense attorney tried to suggest that Sophie's testimony might be influenced by her trauma or by the bikers who had befriended her. It was a mistake that backfired spectacularly. "Your Honor," Sophie said, turning to address the judge directly, "those men saved my life. Not just from Rick, but from believing what Rick told me about myself. They showed me that being disabled doesn't make me worthless. They showed me that there are people in this world who will stand up for what's right, even when it's hard." She looked directly at Callahan, who couldn't meet her eyes. "I'm not angry anymore. I'm grateful. Because of what happened to me, hundreds of other kids are going to be safer. Because those bikers cared enough to act. Children like me now have people watching out for them." The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. Callahan was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to 15 years in prison without the possibility of parole. Additionally, he was ordered to pay restitution totaling $750,000, representing his entire net worth to a fund for disabled children. As Callahan was led away, Sophie felt a hand on her shoulder. Steele had quietly approached the witness stand. "You did good, kiddo," he said softly. "Your mom would be proud." Sophie smiled, tears streaming down her face. "We all did good." 2 years later, on a crisp autumn day that reminded Steele of that first night at Murphy's gas station, Sophie graduated from high school as valedictorian. Her speech was about the power of advocacy and the importance of speaking up for those who can't speak for themselves. 3 years ago, she told the audience, "I was a girl who believed she was worthless because someone told her that her disability made her a burden. I thought no one would ever see me as valuable or capable of making a difference in the world." Steele sat in the front row, wearing his only suit and fighting back tears. "But then I met some angels," Sophie continued. "They didn't have wings or halos. They had leather jackets and motorcycles. They taught me that strength isn't about being able to run away from danger, it's about standing up to it. They taught me that family isn't just about blood, it's about people who show up when you need them most." Sophie looked directly at Steele and his brothers, who had all come to see her graduate. "They kept every promise they made to me. They showed me that I was worth protecting, worth believing in, worth fighting for. And because of that, I learned to fight for myself and for others." The standing ovation lasted 5 minutes. After the ceremony, Sophie approached Steele with an envelope in her hands. "What's this?" he asked. "My college acceptance letter. Full scholarship to study law at the FAS, University of Colorado. I'm going to specialize in disability rights and child advocacy." Steele opened the letter and felt his chest swell with pride. "Sophie, this is incredible. I have something else to tell you," Sophie said, her eyes bright with excitement. "The Thompson family has officially adopted me. I have a real family now." "But," she hesitated, then smiled, "I was wondering if you'd walk me down the aisle at the adoption ceremony as my chosen family." Steele looked at this remarkable young woman who had grown from a terrified girl, whispering in the rain, to a confident advocate ready to change the world, and he realized that she had saved him just as much as he had saved her. "Sophie," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "it would be the greatest honor of my life. Today, Sophie Martinez Thompson is a practicing attorney specializing in disability rights and child advocacy. She has argued cases before the Supreme Court and has been instrumental in passing legislation that protects vulnerable children across the nation. The Sophie Shield program has grown into a national organization with chapters in all 50 states. Over the past 5 years, they have helped more than 3,000 children escape abusive situations and have raised over $15 million for child protection programs. Steele still rides, though not as often as he used to. He and his wife Carol, they reunited 2 years after Sophie's case brought out the protective, caring side of him that Carol had always known was their now foster disabled children, providing a safe haven for kids who need advocates. Rick Callahan was released from prison after serving 12 years of his sentence. He moved to another state and lives quietly, knowing that he will spend the rest of his life being watched by people who remember what he did to an innocent child. Murphy's gas station still stands on Route 47, though it's under new management now. There's a small plaque by the door that reads, "Sometimes heroes stop here for gas." The current owner, who knows the story, keeps a box of hot chocolate and warm blankets behind the counter, just in case. And sometimes, late at night when the rain falls like tears across the highway, travelers report seeing motorcycles stopped at the station, leather-clad figures, helping stranded motorists, buying meals for hungry families, or simply making sure that no one has to face the darkness alone. Because that's what the brotherhood does. That's what family does. They show up, they keep their promises, and they never, ever let an innocent person whisper, "I can't run from him," without ensuring that they'll never have to run again. If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe to help us continue telling stories of hope and courage. More importantly, if you know a child who might be in danger, speak up. Call your local child protective services. Contact the National Child Abuse Hotline at 1-800-4-ACHILD. And remember, Sophie's words, strength isn't about being able to run away from danger. It's about standing up to it. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to look away. Write in the comments, "I won't look away," if you're committed to protecting children in your community. Because every child deserves to have angels watching over them, even if those angels wear leather and ride motorcycles. Up next, you got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.